Hello beautiful people, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to dive into a very important topic: burnout, compassion fatigue, fatigue in general. And I actually have a couple of notes here. I apologize, I'm using my Lenovo, and I don't know, it acts up. So if you hear like the laptop close or something, that's because it's like acting up and whatever the case may be. So let's dive in here. Okay. So I guess I just want to start with, well, we all know what it feels like to be run down. And if we think about college, for example, like, oh, Jesus Christ. In college, it was a mess. Like, I just felt like I had class all the time, and of course, like, attendance is mandatory in class. I don't know what anybody, like, I know bigger universities, you can kind of get away with, like, not going to class in, like, Psych 101, because it's a lecture, but once I started to get, like, more into my discipline, attendance was mandatory, and if you didn't go, for some reason, you missed out on a lot of material. It was almost like you became more behind because you took a day off. So that's how school was, and college was very, very stressful, and I did get burnt out from school for sure. It was very difficult for me towards the end of college. It was very difficult for me to focus. It was very difficult for me to, do papers and do homework for long periods of time. Sometimes I even had trouble sitting through a 3-hour lecture. Sometimes I had issues, like I had to sit in the back of the class so I could stand up and move around, because like I couldn't necessarily sit there for that long. And I thought that I was crazy, right? Like, I thought that maybe, senioritis, like in high school, but no, it wasn't senioritis at all. And then now, when I talk to professionals, like, I worked with a couple of endodontists, and they all said that they felt, depending on where they were in their training, the same exact way with having issues doing homework for long spans of time. So that was, I guess, my first experience with burnout, right? And I'm sure that everybody else can kind of relate to some sort of burnout, washed out feeling that you felt in college, because it's a lot to take on classes, to do the homework. Some people are working, some people have to take on their family responsibilities, even though they're maybe not necessarily living with their family. So it's a lot to take in all at once. In terms of music therapy, I guess the first time, and I wouldn't necessarily say it was burnout per se, it was more I was tired, I was fatigued. And that was mainly because of the schedule, because here I was going from passive learning in undergrad to now active learning, active sessions, running around, doing activities. And when you're a music therapist, especially like in your internship, like, I don't know, I had music history at 8 a.m. In college. It was awful. It was horrible. But like, I got through it, and you didn't necessarily, I hate to say it, but like, I could go to that class and like have breakfast and drink my tea and sort of start to wake up. I took notes in the class for sure, but I did do that thing where you record classes, which is like one of the best things ever when you record your lectures. And music history, especially, actually any 8 a.m. course I had, recording the lectures was like wonderful. Make sure you ask your teachers for permission first. But recording lectures is wonderful. What I ended up doing was, it wasn't necessarily a recording per se, but my computer was recording what the professor said and typing it up on Word. And I would say that was like the best. So it was almost like a transcript of the class. Now I get transcripts of my classes all the time, because you can just download it, which is great. But that's kind of how I sort of got through those 8 a.m. classes. Is yes, I was physically there. Yes, I was paying attention to the best of my ability. I'm not a morning person. I was taking notes, but I would record the lecture and have it typed out. So then that way I could read it later in the day when I was more awake. So if you think about that process, again, passive learning. And that's what I did. But then in internship, we didn't necessarily have sessions at 8, but like we did have, I think my earliest session was like 10, and and that was a co-led session. And that's still, anything earlier than 12 is early, okay? So like that was still early for me. But the thing is that, yeah, I survived 8 a.m. courses in college, but there's a difference between sitting, passively learning, and then actively implementing a session with high energy when you're not a morning person. And a lot of times when I did my music therapy sessions, I often had like this calmness about myself, because that's kind of how I am when I play music in general. Especially if I'm tired, I like play kind of more relaxed music, or I play at a more relaxed pace, which isn't appropriate as a music therapist, because the clients don't need you to be playing at a relaxed pace because it's the morning and you're not awake. They need to be stimulated. They need their goals met. They need you to cover X, Y, and Z objectives. So it doesn't necessarily work. But that was, so my internship, I would say that I got very physically and mentally fatigued. Not necessarily to the point of burnout, but very drained, just because my body was taking on a new schedule. And that happens all the time, especially when a lot of, we always hear the teachers, like the first year of teaching, they get sick and they're like physically tired and stuff like that because their body's not necessarily used to it. Nurses, this happens all the time. So it's not unusual to feel that way. It's just that we get to experience it in internship before we get paid. But what I wanted to dive in was compassion fatigue and burnout. There are two different things. I'm going to kind of read you guys off some of the basic components just as a refresher, because we all have read and heard and seen things about this all the time. So anyway, so I'm just going to read off the definition because they are different. So compassion fatigue, they both and burnout have similar issues. However, compassion fatigue is related to absorbing the trauma and the stress of others. It often creates a secondary traumatic stress in the assistant or the helper. Burnout is actually being worn out and can affect any profession. All right, so there's the differences. So the thing with both, because this can happen regardless of whether you have compassion fatigue and you're emotionally and physically drained because you're taking on the worries of others, or if you're burnt out, definitely can affect your overall mood. A lot of people become irritable. They have like this negative energy about them. They just like don't care. Like go to work and it's just like, don't mess with them. We all know who they are. But sometimes that negativity can affect your personal life too, and it can affect your relationships, and it can affect your social communication skills with others outside of work, which is the issue for the most part. Like the problem is beginning at work in this case, but then it's going into your personal life, and then it's just making you even a more miserable person. And we don't want that for any of you. So, obviously, common self-care. We all heard it. I'm going to talk about it to memory, jog your memory, but we're not going to like dive into this. I'm going to tell you about my personal experience more. So, of course, the number one thing, I love when these people say this, the number one thing to help with fatigue is a diary. Second is meditating. third is exercise. I think, like, that's just, like, the overall, that's the prescription that they give everybody. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it works for you. So, we also talk about self-care. So they talk about physical self-care, mental self-care, emotional self-care, social self-care, and spiritual self-care. And I believe that that is true. However, like, not one fits all. You might be like a little bit more of one than the other. You know, you might need a little bit of everything. So I don't really think that this prescription is good for most people. But this is kind of, when you go on Google, these are kind of some of the things that come up when you ask people. This is some of the stuff that they say. But we're going to really dive into, like, how to actually set the reset button. Another thing that they talk about, and this was kind of new to me, was a quality of life scale. And I honestly thought it was one of those, like, that they said, like, you know, that they give you at the doctor's office to make sure you're not suicidal. But it's a lot more questions. I mean, it really depends on, like, which one, because there's a lot of them here. But if you're having trouble and you need a little bit of introspection, you can always check out a quality of life scale. This quality of life scale that I'm going to attach at the bottom, this is actually from Bancroft, from one of their webinars, just to let you guys know. Okay, so why don't we dive in? So self-care is something actually that I'm kind of sort of passionate about, I would say. I mean, I can be kind of conceited and narcissistic sometimes. I think everybody who's a firstborn child is like that. So during my internship, I had to do a project, and I actually did one on stress relief activities, and that's why I'm going to talk about it with you guys. Let me dive into my personal experience, though, before we start. So, I became extremely burnt out when I started working. Okay, and this is going to sound horrible, but I have only ever experienced compassion fatigue when assisting family members, medically and emotionally. I've never felt compassion fatigue with my patients. Like I said, I know that's going to sound horrible, but it's mainly because, like, when I go about patients, like, when I work with them, I just kind of, yes, I'm creative and I'm out of the box and all that stuff, but I go in with, okay, like, what's the problem, assessment, okay, like, treatment plan, implementation, evaluate, like, and that's like the structure I sort of follow. I don't necessarily, yes, I know about their personal lives, and yes, like, we bond over things and develop rapport and all that stuff, but I don't know, it kind of stops there. I don't, like, sometimes I get sad, don't get me wrong, but, like, I don't know, it doesn't really, their emotional trauma, their emotional stress doesn't necessarily affect me per se, because I go in with this, like, assessment, treatment plan, implementation, evaluate, like, process with everybody. And yeah, and actually that component of myself was, I think, one of the main reasons why I was put in a medical setting, in a hospice setting, because, like, I get sad when patients die, but then I move on. And it does take a lot for somebody to, like, be able to, you know, work with the patient, develop rapport with the patient, see them succeeding, and then all of a sudden, the next time you go to the session, they're not there anymore. And a lot of people don't really cope with it very well, and if you don't, like, that's totally fine. That's why there's a million other populations you can work with. But I was able to cope with it very maturely, and it didn't necessarily affect me. It didn't affect my work per se. So, yeah, so that's me. Burnout is one of the things that I desperately suffer with, and I suffered with it a lot during my first job. So a couple things, like, I got very burnt out as a CNA because I was around patients 24/7. I got really burnt out as a music therapist, again, because I was around patients and doing like 8-hour long sessions, and nobody was allowing me to take a break. So I got burnt out. Scribing, actually, I did not get burnt out scribing. I actually became bored scribing because it was passive. Like, yeah, like you don't really get a break when you're a scribe and you're following the doctor and it's a busy day, but I didn't necessarily get burnt out. I just became bored because even though like a lot's going on, you're passive. Like you're typing what the doctor says. You're not necessarily doing anything. Whereas music therapy and CNA especially, you're doing stuff all the time. Like it's all active. And then music therapy, at my first job, it was very, very active, and I didn't necessarily get paid. There were a lot of other things that kind of caused the burnout. I wouldn't necessarily say it was music therapy in general. It was the work environment, like me being with clients 8 hours straight, like getting stressed because I didn't have time to session plan, getting stressed because I didn't have time to do notes, like all of that factored into the burnout. And then also too, when I was a music therapist, like I was also teaching lessons, and that's something that I just wanted to point out to you guys, that like I was teaching music lessons and I was doing music therapy, and I did like teaching music lessons, but it was more at that point a money issue because I wanted to pay off my student loan as fast as I could, and I wouldn't be able to do that with entry level. So it was more for money, but doing music, even though I was teaching and therapy, it was still music, and I was still using the same instruments and sometimes the same genres of music. So music, I got really burnt out really quick. Whereas like when I was a scribe, it was medical, emergency medicine, and then I was doing finance courses. So there were two separate things, two separate parts of the brain. So that also led to me not getting burnt out. And like I said, scribing was it's challenging for a lot of people because of the terminology and the all the stuff you have to know. Like you have to understand when they say things, like, you have to know what that means and know where to put it in the chart. But scribing was really boring, I'm not gonna lie. Like, so anyway, we're moving on. So that's why I became burnt out, especially from CNA, especially from music therapy, and I was with the patients all the time, like the whole shift, no break. So what I ended up doing was, and it took a while to get to this point, but I started to try to figure out what stress relief activities really helped me feel better. Obviously, eating healthy, obviously getting a good night's sleep, obviously watching TV, but I got to the point where, like, I would come home from the shift and I would want to, like, eat, like, sleep, watch TV, and I wouldn't accomplish anything when I got home because I was so drained. And that's not necessarily healthy. That's not a lifestyle that I want to be living. So I have here, and I'm going to attach it at the bottom, it's stress relief activities. I found this on Pinterest. I thought it was really good. And I used this in my project. And it goes through stress relief activities based on the 5 senses. And going through this list actually helped me sort of figure out my own stress relief activities. So, for example, if your taste, let's say, like, that's the sense, right? Mouth, they do deep breathing exercises, eating a piece of chocolate, repeating affirmations, having a chat. These types, I mean, of course I love talking to people, but these types of things don't really give me that much stress relief, especially eating chocolate. I actually don't like chocolate. Moving on is touch. So some of those stress activities is exercising, wearing warm clothing, like actually physically baking, playing an instrument, doing yoga, having a massage. All of those things, except for the baking component, actually make me really help relieve my stress. I love, especially like playing with like silly putty, you know, playing an instrument, exercising. I'm a very touchy type of person. Also think that's why I like going shopping, because then I can try on all these clothes and shoes. So that definitely hit the nail right on the head, but we'll go through a couple more. So we have the sense of smell, you know, aromatherapy. They talk about brewing coffee. I don't have a very strong sense of smell, but I do like candles, because I like looking at the flame, and that's what we're on to next. Reading. So like sight. So reading a good book, painting a picture, daydreaming. I am a visual learner, so I don't necessarily read books, like, unless it's for school. If it's for pleasure, I actually listen to books, and that's what we're on to next. Playing music, listening to the sounds, listening to music, reading an audiobook, and there you go. So there you have it. So just by going through this, I'm definitely touchy-feely type of person. Sight a little bit and hearing a little bit too, and sight, taste isn't necessarily my thing, but just based on that. So there's like a number of activities that they list for those three senses. So then based on that, I kind of started to develop a schedule. Now, what my schedule, because touch is very important, right? So as a music therapist, yes, I'm playing instruments, okay? But then when I'm outside, what's the best way for me to relieve stress? Yoga, going to the gym. So that is why, you know, I go to the gym. And like I said, I spend 2 hours at the gym. And not only am I moving during that period of time, but I'm also listening. Sometimes I'm listening. I actually don't listen to music at the gym, but I listen to, sometimes I listen to my lectures for school. Excuse me. Sometimes I watch videos on YouTube. Sometimes I watch Netflix. And then, of course, when you watch videos and Netflix, like, you're looking and you're listening. So it's all of them all at once. And that's why I go to the gym. And that's why I go to the gym for 2 hours. Next, the other thing I do on a daily basis is I'll either listen to my audiobook or I will watch TV. And I do that about like an hour before bed. I know they say not to watch TV an hour before bed, but it brings me joy. And that's usually when I have my tea also. So that drinking something warm. So that also like really kind of relaxes me, relaxes my mind and stuff. So that's what I do on a daily basis. I only really need 3 hours to myself. Okay? And that's what and I think that's pretty darn good, considering there's 24 hours in a day. 3 hours in order for me to feel recharged every day is actually really good, I think. But that's what works for me, and it's also 3 hours because I put all the like activities sort of together in one period of time. Now another thing that I do, I don't necessarily like face masks. Like I do face masks, but they're not necessarily my niche, you know. But what I do weekly is Thursday nights is my night. It's me time, and usually on Thursday nights I'll either watch like a girly show like Gilmore Girls or what's the other one? Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce, Working Moms. Like sometimes I'll watch like a girly funny show like that, or sometimes I watch like a girly movie, not a sappy movie, but like, you know, like He's Just Not That Into You, Eat, Pray, Love, like one of those things. And then I either make myself tea or have a drink, and again, that's like 3 hours, right? Because the movie's about 2-ish, right? And then sometimes if I do a face mask or like shave or lotion or light a candle, you know, there's another extra hour. But that's what I do Thursday nights. Thursday nights are me time. And then Friday night or Saturday night, it's one or the other, is date night when we go out. So that's what I do. That helps keep me sane. Have I skipped? Yes, I've skipped actually fairly recently because of class. Like I've skipped I've skipped Thursday me night. I've skipped, well, I've adapted date night to be like an hour-long date night. So yes, I am flexible to adapting, but then I just make up for it. So like when class is over, okay, well then I'm gonna take a whole day, a whole personal day, you know, and there you go. And then you just like, I just kind of balance it out that way. Another reason why I personally chose Thursday is because Thursday is like as my me day. Thursday is the day when I feel the most burnt out. It's always been that way, and I guess because I don't work on Sundays right now, but like when I was a music therapist at my internship, it was Sunday through Thursday, so Thursday was the end of the week. Now I do start Monday, but Tuesdays are the late nights, and then I have projects due for school on Wednesday, so Wednesday usually I'm up late doing homework, so by Thursday I'm pretty darn burnt out. So that's another reason why I chose Thursday as my me time. And have I skipped? I put it in the calendar, but yes I do skip me time sometimes because I sometimes I forget, I get wrapped up in things, and that's fine. Just like you just want to make sure that you balance it out. But yeah, so that was, I think that was the best way for me to analyze the situation. I'm going to talk about this job in and of itself too, because that's really important. When it comes to, I'm just going to say when it comes to music therapy, music therapy is a job that really should be direct care and notes. You know, it should be a little bit more direct care, more session planning, more implementation than note taking, but it should be like a 60-40, 60% like implementation sessions, meetings, like, you know, and then 40%, well, no, I'm sorry, 60% sessions, patients, activities, outings, and then 40% should be the note-taking, the collaboration, the meetings, the projects, the assignments, the continuing education, you know, and that's how it really should be. And in certain places, it is that way. Like at my internship, that's the way it was structured. And some days we did more sessions than like meetings and notes, but other days we did more meetings and notes than we did sessions. So by the end of the week, it did even out 60-40. And that is the type of work environment I want to be in. I mean, you could even push it to 70-30, because when I was in the emergency room, that is what I did. 70% with patients, 30% notes. So that's pretty good, and that's, I think, the way it should be. However, it is not. And like at my first job, it was sometimes I felt like I was supposed to be a babysitter, and it ended up being 90 to 95% patients and 5 to 10% prep. And that is not good. As a CNA, that's fine because that is your job. As an EMT, that's fine because like that's your job. You are supposed to be with people like the whole entire time, the whole entire day. And you don't necessarily, like CNA, you don't necessarily have to plan anything, you know, like you clean up, you plan their outfits, but you're not necessarily planning a session. You know what I'm saying? So it's okay to be like 90-95% with the clients because that is your job. But as a music therapist, that is not the way your job should be structured. And if you're like me, I couldn't handle being a CNA. Like I couldn't handle being with the patients that often in a day. That's not my personality trait. I need a 60-40. I need a 70-30. Heck, I'll do an 80-20. You know, at a couple dental offices, I did 80-20. I wasn't a music therapist per se, but I was an assistant 80-20, and that's fine too. But you can't, I don't know, once you hit 90, that's when I really start to get burnt out. Like, I need my time, I need my space, I need to think. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially when you're a music therapist. Like, that's fine. You should be doing 60-40. But I got a lot of pushback at my first job, and I was often expected to be a babysitter, not necessarily a clinical physician. And I didn't like that, and it didn't necessarily go with the way I am. It didn't allow me to provide the best care possible. And when I advocated for myself, I did get pushback. And then that is why I ended up leaving that location and went to another place. But so the point is that you do need to reevaluate and make sure that as a music therapist you are doing 60-40, 70-30, more on the patient interaction, but make sure you are getting that time to go to meetings, to do notes, to take lunch, because it is not your job to be with the clients 24/7. That's a CNA's job. You know, that's their nurses, not necessarily their nurses, but that's like their one-to-ones job. You know, that's not your job as a music therapist, okay? And like any company would be stupid to like make you do 90% with the clients, because they're paying you more than they would be a CNA, so they're actually losing money. Even with that point, it still wasn't enough. But that's okay. But that's the truth of the matter. Before we go, patient time. I did have one particular patient that I worked with at a facility prior to my first job, and this was the same patient. And the patient was great and wonderful and really sweet, but was a lot. He always loved hearing the sound of his own voice. He needed a lot of stimulation. And when I was working with him at the other site it was structured differently, where we only saw him for 1 hour and then we saw another patient. Whereas at my first job, he was there. He was one of the ones I had to sit with, you know, for hours and hours and hours. And if you have a problem patient like that, I would definitely talk to your supervisor, talk to your boss, because it's okay to say, hey, this patient's burning me out. But no, this patient is irritating me. This patient is making me upset. This patient, you know, and then I can't do my job and I end up snapping, because that is what ends up happening. So if you do have a trouble patient or problem patient, definitely bring it up to somebody. At my old facility, or at my first job, they weren't necessarily able to balance my schedule, but they were able to balance who took care of this patient at what time. So anyway, I hope these tips and tricks help. I apologize this video was so long, but take a look at the stuff I put down below in the description. And I really hope that you can be able to balance your life so you don't get compassion fatigue and you don't get burnout, and you can be the best music therapist that you possibly can be. Okay, have a good day, everyone. Talk to you later. Bye!